Hey guys, what's going on? Today is another What's in the Box video. Just a reminder, What's in the Box series. When I'm done at the end of the series, I'm going to do a giveaway. Then I'm going to give away this box, and some other gear is going to come to you in that box. That'll be decided at that time. Today's box is Steelhead jigs, and I am going to go through, not only am I going to show you my jigs and what colors I like to use, I'm also going to show you how I rig them up. So I have my terminal box here too, and this will probably be actually next will be, I'm going to go through a couple different terminal boxes, because making one video about a terminal box doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, since there's a lot to terminal boxes. And so we're just going to start off with this, doing jigs. Steelhead jigs. Yeah, let's just open the box and get right into it. For me, steelhead jigs are good for both winter and summer on steelhead. I don't know where you live, but where I live, we have both winter and summer on steelhead. The seasons are kind of different. Jigs are a really good kind of low clear water situation, although you can use them in heavier water as well. But I have found that in low clear water is when I do the best with them. And the whole thing with the jig setup is you're fishing a float in a jig. So if you live in an area that has smallmouth bass and you've heard of the bobber and fly technique, it's basically the same technique. You have a bobber and it's set up on a stopper, and it goes down to a leader, which goes to a jig. And the whole key is you're trying for it to go kind of naturally with the current at the speed of the current you're fishing. So that's kind of the whole trick between the float and jig. Colors, where I live anyway, pink obviously is a very famous popular color, or cerise. Also, probably the most used jig where I live, and used by myself in particular, that I love to use, is the Nightmare jig. And Nightmare is a color combination of black, white, and red. And usually the white is the jig head, and then the black and the red can be like, this one is the body. These both have a red body. They're different materials. Some of them use like hackle, like this one. Some of them are just yarn jigs. I don't know if I have any yarn jigs. I don't think I have any. So, but this is the Nightmare jig. This is a woolly bugger Nightmare jig. This is a very popular one. I've got lots of summer in on that particular pattern. Some other patterns that I've done well on is this kind of peach color. Especially in the northern rivers. When I'm talking northern, I'm talking northern peninsula, the Queets, the Hoe, rivers like that. For those of you local who know what those rivers are, these colors always seem to work good for me on those. And especially in the summertime, on those rivers, they work really well. Here's some that are kind of Nightmare, but they have black jig heads instead of white. Also, colors that I really like. And then if I ever go south, so like the Cowlitz River and stuff like that, this olive color seems to be really good. So yeah, and I just have all different kinds of colors. The most important part with jigs is you want them to drift at the popper speed. You don't really want them bouncing off the bottom, and the bobber and everything, it kind of slows everything down. So you're actually going about a third of the actual current speed. And what happens is your jig's coming through the water, you cast it out, it's drifting. Your jig's coming through the water, usually like this. And the steelhead are, what I've observed watching people fish jigs from bridges and things like that, is the steelhead will come up behind it, and they'll kind of stay behind it and stay behind it and stay behind it. And then when they start running out of water, when the hole starts tailing out and they start feeling their bellies getting close to the gravel on the bottom, for some reason, that's when it seems to trigger them to bite. And then they'll usually bite, and then they'll usually take off upstream, which is kind of handy. this particular jig, I caught one of my nicest summer run steelhead ever on the Queets River with that one, with that rubber worm. And you don't always have to use jigs with hackle and stuff. You can just take a jig head, put a pink plastic worm on it, works really well as well. All kinds of stuff. So how do you rig a jig and bobber, at least in the Pacific Northwest? And I suppose this could work anywhere. We do slip bobbers. I do slip bobbers. Not everybody does a slip bobber, but I like to use a slip bobber. Seems to work best for me. And I'll use braided line. This is 30-pound Strike King Contra is what I like. And this is how I like to rig it. So you start out with first a bobber stopper. And there's lots of different kinds of bobber stoppers out there. These are the ones that I like. The little string yarn kind. There's little plastic ones that have a little wire deal that you can use. But my issue with those is a lot of times what happens, and I'm going to cut this off to get that little fuzzy deal out of there. A lot of times what happens is those little plastic ones on the wire deals, they slide on this braided line, and this braided line eventually just cuts right through them and they fall off, and then you have to start all over again and retie. So I'm going to move this box. Hopefully you can see this line okay. If you can't, I'm sorry. I'm going to zoom just a little bit. There you go. So you start with a bobber stopper. And these little bobber stoppers, these little thread yarn kind, are the kind that I like to use. They stay on, and they'll stay on forever, and they'll go through your guides pretty well. And one of the nice parts is once you put one on, you can still use your pole for other kinds of rigging, but once that's on there, it's on there, and you don't need to ever take it off. And you can, even if you take your bobber and everything else off and say cast a spinner or whatever, you can still leave that on there. And you slide it on there, and you take this little plastic tube that's in the center and slide it out. And this is difficult to do. Neighbors are out through a camera. Anyway, so we take that off, and then you wet it. I usually wet it, and then just take both lines like that and slide it, and it cinches down on your main line. Cinch it down really, really good, and then that's your stop, and it stays stopped on there pretty good. Then you take, and I like to trim these, but I don't trim them all the way off because it will loosen up when it gets wet, and so you may have to retighten it a little bit more. So I'll leave just a little end so I can grab one end with my teeth and the other end with a pair of pliers and tighten it, retighten it. And the longer it's on there, you retighten it over and over and over. I don't know what's going on, why my neighbor's kids are screaming, but they're visiting. I'm at the beach. It's their beach house. I can't complain. So anyway, that goes first. Okay, bobber stopper. Then I like to put a bead. You can use whatever color beads you like. I have green ones and red ones. Color of the bead does not matter. It just matters that you have a bead. And the bead is supposed to stop on the stopper, but it didn't because the hole's too big. Where is... I have these little green beads that don't do that. Now, we're going to use the red bead. So, I'm trying to do this quick, guys, because I don't want this to be a half-hour long video, but anyway. And you put on the bead, and then what I like to do, and see that stops against there. What I like to do is, and I saw this trick watching a show called Hog Quest, and it works really well, is I like to put a corky after the bead. And this is a corky. It's just a chunk of foam basically painted in a bright color. And what that does is that's a very good indication for me. You put that on, then you put on your ball bear. And 3/8, these are 3/8 ounce. I'm not exactly sure how that rates. I just know that 3/8 to 3/4 ounce work good for me. Anyway, I like this bobber. Shape of the bobber is important. For jig fishing, I like a bobber that's slim like this and long, so it's easier for the fish to drag under and it doesn't give resistance. And for me, the corky on here is something I can see. So if it's floating down the river and it's like this, and it's not hitting the bobber, I know that my line hasn't slid all the way through, so the jig is not at the maximum depth possible. So that's why I do that. It's a really good indicator. Then you do your ball bear, and then I like to use bobber weights, is what they call them here. They're just basically like a little inline sinker with a swivel set up on them. Find one that hasn't been used. And you can use any kinds of weights. You can just tie a swivel on here and clip on a weight is what a lot of guys use, but I like these, like this. And you'll tie your main line. And when I use braid, I like to use a Palomar knot whenever possible, or I use just a good old fisherman's knot too. But I'm going to go with Palomar, which is make a loop. Oops. You make a loop. You slide it through the swivel. Do an overhand knot. Then you take that loop and you put it over the swivel or over the weight or over the lure, whatever you're using with a Palomar knot. You can use this Palomar knot on just about anything. Like that. Then you wet it. And you tighten it. And bingo, you have a Palomar knot. You tie it, and then you can snip your tag in. And then below that, on the other end, let me cut this old leader off. I've used this weight a few times. And the other good thing about using a slip bobber is you don't have to use as long a fishing pole. Like some guys don't use a slip bobber, but they'll use like a 12 or 13 or 14 foot long fishing rod. I don't like doing that. I like to use like the shortest rod that I can get away with. And so now you have this weight, and then onto the weight, to the other end, I'll tie on a liter of fluorocarbon. This is just happens to be one brand, 10-pound test clear. I like that. That'll handle just about any size steelhead you're going to get in the summer and most of them in the winter. I've had break-offs, but very few with this leader. And then on the other end of that leader, you'll tie your jig. And you can tie your jig with whatever knot you like. I like to use a Palomar knot there too. So you'll tie your jig, and that'll be down below. And then if you're having still trouble, say your jig, your weight and bobber are going through the water and your jig's still getting pulled way behind, it's good to have split shot that you can add like that. So you can put another split shot between this weight and the jig just to keep it, because you want to keep it straight up and down as much as possible. You want this to drift right along with the current and stay straight up and down. So anyway, that's how you tie that. I like to fish in areas, steelhead are kind of different. They'll lay right in the middle, midstream, usually in not super strong current, but definitely with current. They don't, I've caught very few that are like in slack water or back eddies. They'll be laying right in front of a back eddy sometimes. But you throw it out, you want it to drift along slow, about the speed of the current. You watch your bobber goes under, means you got a fish. So it's also a great way to take beginners, because drift fishing for steelhead and trying to feel them bite, until you feel one or two, you don't even realize what a steelhead feels like, and you miss a lot. I've watched guys, newbies especially, miss a lot of fish. But with this, it's hard to miss them. It's hard to miss them. And I like to use braid because one of the things you can do, or you can buy floating braid that floats, but you can grease up the last 20, 30 feet of your braid, and it'll float on the water, so you can mend it like on a fly rod. That works really good. But the other good reason I like braid is when you pick up on that fish, when it takes that bobber down, you can pick up a lot of line really fast, and you can get to that fish, so you direct hook up quickly. And you need to do it quickly, because man, they are so good at grabbing it and spitting it out, and grabbing it and spitting it out. I've watched it, and they can grab it and spit it out so gently that your bobber won't even move. And I've seen it before. Like I said, watching guys fishing while I'm standing up on a bridge, and watching steelhead come up and grab their bait and spit it out, and they don't even know it. And you're like, oh, you had one, dang it. And that's what happens. That's what happens. But it's not hard. It doesn't take a whole lot of like technical skill or gear or anything. You get a pocket full of jigs, you get bobbers, you get some bobber stops and some weights, and you're in. You don't have to use braided line. You don't have to do all the stuff I just said. You can do it however you want. This just works for me. I'm not a professional, but this is what works. And I'll roll in some pictures of some steelhead that I've caught in the past in this video. So, you got to see that I have actually caught some steelhead. They are one of my favorite fish to fish for. So, and you can also use, you don't have to use jigs on a bobber. You can use leaders and with regular hooks, and put bait like shrimp or eggs or whatever, and drift those to the same hole. And that also works for king salmon, like drifting eggs. So that we're talking about the jig box. And one of the biggest issues with jigs is, because they got all this fuzzy hair, is moisture. And that's where these boxes come in really handy, with this moisture absorbent stuff in there to keep the moisture down. The hooks don't rust, and as you can see, everything's nice and fluffy and bright and colorful, and it keeps the colors from bleeding together. These are straight black. I didn't talk about these. These ones work really good. This is just basically a fly pattern right there, like a woolly bugger fly pattern. These work really well in the summer when the water's super low and clear. The steelhead like black like this. Steelhead, unlike salmon, still feed in the rivers. I've watched them eat bugs off the surface, so I know they still feed. It's not just a reaction thing like salmon. They like to eat eggs, they like to eat shrimp, all kinds of stuff, but they eat. So, and that's important to know the difference. And then, like I said, we'll have to do a video one of these days of actually fishing with these jigs, and I'll show you guys some more of how the technique works. But anyway, that's it for this box. Please stick around. Please like, please subscribe. I'm trying to gain my subscribers. At the end of the giveaway, I'm going to send you this box, and it's going to have probably a wiggle wart plug in it, and a couple of spinners, and maybe a couple jigs too, and maybe a bobber and some bobber stops and stuff like that, and you can set up and do some jig fishing for yourself. So it works all over the country. I've watched videos of guys using jig and bobbers in Michigan and New York and all over. Wherever you have steelhead, the jig and bobber will work. It's funny, because the first time I saw guys using jigs and bobbers, I thought they were full of crap. But then I seen them catch fish, and I was like, oh, this actually works. So anyway, please like, please subscribe, please follow. Please go check out elliesseatreasures.com for some of the merchandise that we make from stuff that we find off of the beach. And I hope you guys are having a great Saturday and a great weekend. And thanks for watching my channel, and I will talk to you later.